I do want to talk about those implications on the job because, as you mentioned, as you laid out, there are multiple wars, there are multiple situations in different regions throughout the world that he has a huge hand in. So, what are the implications here? How troubling is it that he withheld this information to the president in regard to the different wars going on in different regions?
I think it's very troubling. I mean, the Secretary of Defense, as I alluded to earlier, has specific authorities. There's a lot of legalese here, and I don't understand all of the details. But within any, operational situation, there's a determination of at what level does this decision need to be made. And a number of those decisions are made at the Secretary of Defense level to decide to hit a particular target, to move forces in a particular direction. And if the Secretary of Defense is not operational and needs to delegate that, well, then that moves down to somebody else. And that's a key factor. If the president is, having a conversation with his national security advisor about whether or not to move on a target, one of the first calls would be to the person who has the power to make the Secretary of Defense decision. Normally the Secretary of Defense, unless the Secretary is incapacitated, then it moves down to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. But that's the kind of thing that the National Security Advisor and the president need to know right when it happens. So yes, it is a big problem.
I know you said one of the big questions you have is why Secretary Austin withheld this information, but I want to read you part of a joint statement you released with Chairman Mike Rogers. Quote, several questions remain unanswered, including what the medical procedure and resulting complications were, what the Secretary's current health status is, how and when the delegation of the Secretary's responsibilities were made, and the reason for the delay in notification to the President and Congress. Have you received, in your opinion, adequate answers to any, some, or all of these questions?
I was trying to sift through them as you were going down through them. I think the answer to that question is, I think all of those questions have been answered. We now know what the procedure was. We know what the complications were. We know when the notification did and didn't. I'm pretty sure all of those questions have been answered. But again, the one question that hasn't been answered that I think is really important for Secretary Austin's role as the Secretary of Defense going forward is, what is his understanding of the job if he thought this was acceptable to not notify the president about these rather crucial factors in his medical health that impacted his ability to do the job? I mean, does he have some understanding of this job that I'm not aware of? So that question needs to be answered, because again, to me, in this position, if you have any kind of significant health problem, I mean, your first phone call is to your wife, your second phone call is to the president. Okay. And that just has to happen so that the president knows the capabilities and the health of one of his key military advisors.
The White House Chief of Staff is reportedly implementing different procedures and policies to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. But you're in Congress. Can Congress ensure that this doesn't happen again? What can you guys do?
Well, nobody can ensure that this doesn't happen again. I mean, individuals make the choices that they make. I think certainly on the presidential side, they can make clear, this is the policy. Now, again, as far as I'm concerned, that policy was pretty clear to begin with. I mean, I don't know exactly what it says. I don't know if there's a manual somewhere that says, if you get ill, please notify the president. But the chain of command, pretty straightforward. Okay. So I'm pretty sure it's fairly clear. I mean, they're emphasizing, and I assume for Secretary Austin's benefit. But no, I don't think there's anything Congress can do. This isn't a law. This is a matter of how the White House operates, and again, how the chain of command operates between the commander in chief and the Secretary of Defense.
The White House reportedly expressed confidence in Austin over the weekend and reportedly is not considering firing him. Do you have confidence that Secretary Austin can complete this job?
I have confidence, absolutely, that Secretary Austin can complete this job. No doubt about that at all. As I said earlier, in terms of his skill set, frankly, what I'm worried about is the implications for the president. The president needs to have confidence across the world and across the country. And if there are doubts out there, if people are asking some of the questions that you asked just a few minutes ago about, well, gosh, what does it say about the relationship? Then that in and of itself undermines the president's ability to be the international leader that he ought to be. And I think that's a serious question that the White House has to figure out. what does this do to the level of confidence that people have in the president and his relationship with the key people on his national security team? I think that's a serious question. And I've communicated to the White House that they need to be able to answer that directly, affirmatively, and very transparently. And, even after this story broke, I think it was on Monday when I was speaking with some Pentagon officials, and they're talking about putting together a press release and trying to be more transparent. And I'm like, what do you mean? You got to tell them, at that point on Monday, as I was having the conversation, they wouldn't even tell me then and hadn't told anybody yet what had happened, what the healthcare situation was. And my thing, you've got to tell people in explicit detail everything that's going on. Now, the next day they did. But I still think there are questions within the leadership of the White House that need to be answered for going forward purposes.